Warning, the following video has been edited to fit YouTube's guidelines, which are really stupid. If you'd like to see the unedited version of the video, sign up at patreon.com/JTCurtis. Enjoy! Laid on me, Daddy-O. I'm JT Curtis, and this is the history of rock and roll, the 2010s. Why do I suddenly get a feeling of deja vu? And 60 years later, rock and roll is still going on strong. Well, holding on for dear life. And that very handsome boy with the sexy hair is me 10 years ago, as of this recording. Yes, the History of Rock series is now part of the 2010s. And to be honest, back then, I really had no plans to talk about the 2010s. There's probably not going to be much to talk about. As of this moment, it's only been 4 years since the decade ended. Even if 2020 dragged on so long it felt like a decade itself. And as has been suggested from even my own followers, there's not as much to talk about when it comes to popular rock music from this time. I mean, we already stated that in the 2000s episode.
This just wasn't the era of rock music.
And the 2010s even less so. So you'd think I'd have even more PTSD from this decade compared to the 2000s. Well, maybe I don't want to sing like Chris Martin, you ambitionless, stupid record company types with your sales charts. But you'd be surprised. Right at the start of 2010, I moved to New York City, released my first solo single on iTunes and the endless amount of other services that were popping up at the time, and continued putting out music all throughout the decade. We'll make it to the bridge. And that's really where rock and roll ended up in the 2010s, back in the underground. Only this time, it was a digital underground of the internet that everybody had access to. Me personally, I just accepted that I wasn't going to get a major record deal, I couldn't compete with the higher profile artists, and it was honestly very liberating. The only problem is that because there's a seemingly infinite number of independent releases from this time, it's hard to highlight them for a video like this. Also, as I said in the beginning, the series is mostly focused on popular rock songs that impacted the genre in one way or another. So I am going to stick to that rule for this episode, for the most part. We'll see what the decade has to offer.
What did I tell you about taking your shoes off before you come into the apartment?
Listen, I gotta be in costume.
Oh, and why are there goldfish all over the floor? Gross!
I was hungry.
Take off your shoes, and no more goldfish in the living room.
Well, as you can see, me and my neighbor moved in together because the old place is underwater. However, I did tell the other guy that I moved into the middle of the woods.
Hello! I brought my copy of Battle Angel! It's really, really good. I've held on to it for about 20 years or so. I'm cold and there are wolves after me.
Now, before we get too far along here, I should mention that since the last History of Rock episode, YouTube has gotten much stricter with their copyright claims, and AI, which runs their Content ID system, is evolving at such a rapid rate, I'm starting to see Terminator 2 as a prophetic documentary. So I'm going to be very sparse about including music examples on the YouTube edit of this video. If you want a more comprehensive version, head on over to my Patreon page. By the beginning of 2010, 3 Days Grace was beating out everyone in the mainstream rock Billboard charts. The song Break is the first #1 listed here. Although nowadays, I don't hear as many people talk about 3 Days Grace, but who knows, maybe 5 years from now this song will have a nostalgic resurgence like Dear Maria Cut Me In. Godsmack also had a hit at this time. You know, the problem with a lot of music from this time is that they all just kind of sound like rehashes of old ideas, especially from the 90s and early 2000s. I mean, considering my own music is a callback to the 70s, I'm not really one to criticize this, but you kind of start to see why rock wasn't really popular anymore. Although when it comes to capturing old rock and roll, do you have to do that while I'm filming the next History of Rock video?
Yes, because I don't want goldfish crumbs all over my rug.
Although the Black Keys went even further back when capturing old rock and roll ideas. Their 2010 album Brothers was actually their breakthrough. It's probably because when you hear it, you know it's the Black Keys. The sound of Dan Auerbach's vocals is so lo-fi, but that's what gives it character. And recording this album in the legendary Muscle Shoals studio certainly added to that feel.
No Pro Tools, 12-channel desk.
And it was almost like we were recording in the basement again, in a room that wasn't really acoustically correct.
It's a fine line between channeling classic sounds and doing something different with them, but when it's done right, it can be very effective and very creative. The first time I heard the song Howlin' For You, I thought, well, this has gotta be a nod to Howlin' Wolf, who we showcased all the way back in the 50s video. Nice to hear him still influencing rock and roll 60 years later.
Must admit, I can't explain any of these thoughts racing through my brain. It's true, baby, I'm howling for you.
Their success would continue with 2011's El Camino, featuring the classic Lonely Boy with that same bluesy sound. Also, I love this video so much. Derek T. Tuggle just sort of improvised his dancing on the spot, which was supposed to be just one part of a big production.
But when the band and the director saw the unedited video of my dancing, they decided, that's it. That's the video, and the rest is history.
When you consider all these overproduced, gimmicky videos of the time that had very little to do with the music, this simple image of a guy grooving to the music really brings rock and roll back to its roots. Credit to the Black Keys for still leaving an impact a decade later. This applied even to their contemporaries. When they toured El Camino, the Arctic Monkeys opened for them. It's probably why I've always felt their 2013 release, AM, sounds a lot like the Black Keys, which is certainly not a bad thing. I briefly highlighted their surprise success in England in the last episode, independently through the internet no less, but they still hadn't really broken through in America. Around the time they toured with the Keys, they premiered a new single, Are You Mine? You can definitely hear the Black Keys' influence on the guitar and vocal sound, while Alex Turner's melodies and lyrics are more reminiscent of their previous works. A year later, AM dropped. The album enjoyed notable sales on both sides of the Atlantic and is still regarded as one of the best albums of the decade.
Crawling back to you. Ever thought I'd call you when
And Alex was not shy about proclaiming rock and roll's resilience.
It will never die. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Probably one of the more interesting.
I am evil Homer. 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 I am evil Homer.
Yes.
Dude, seriously, where are you? I'm lost in the woods. There are wolves after me. We're still not watching Battle Angel. I think the wolves might even be fans of Nickelback.
Probably one of the more interesting releases at the top of the decade came from indie band Vampire Weekend from New York City. Represent. They had released their debut album a couple years before to some notoriety, but their second album, Contra, released in January 2010, was a rare example of indie reaching #1 on the Billboard charts. Similar to my indifference during the 2000s, I was so focused on my own music and moving to New York that I didn't really pay much attention to the band, though everybody around me was talking about them, and looking back, I can see why. That same year, Arcade Fire returned with a #1 album called The Suburbs. It kind of reminds me of after the Gold Rush era Neil Young, though less ecological in its lyrics and more about the suburbs. To be honest, Arcade Fire still doesn't do much for me, but I did enjoy listening to Cage the Elephant's album, Thank You, Happy Birthday.
It's not my birthday.
That's the name of the album.
Never heard of it. Oh, where's the other guy at?
Oh, he's being eaten by wolves.
Oh.
Also, Neon Trees, their single Animal became a hit. Australian artist Courtney Barnett garnered some attention, featuring a grungier, even Dylan-ish sound. Again, with YouTube and Facebook and all of these digital platforms right at our fingertips, bands and artists who previously had to rely on radio airplay or major label distribution could now do it all on their own or with smaller labels. Foster the People was one such band. Their song Pumped Up Kicks was very popular after including it as a free download on their website, and the YouTube video would eventually hit over 1 billion views. I actually was shocked to find out that this song is actually about a school shooter, but unlike the darker sound of something like Pearl Jam's Jeremy, this song is pretty upbeat. So much so that Columbia signed them, and, well, to be honest, I kinda stopped following them soon after. But really, the indie rock sound that seemed to define this era was Fun's We Are Young.
That one I know.
At least the chorus. That seems to be the only part of the song the general public knows these days. And the main reason really is the production, featuring those huge stadium rock-style drums. Thank producer Jeff Bhaskar, best known for his work with... yeah... The song became a #1 worldwide thanks to its inclusion in Yeah. And for a while, it seemed like every single rock song was copying this overproduced sound. If you were on the lookout for rock and roll in its rawer form, you weren't going to find it on mainstream radio. In fact, just to see where we're at, let's see what was #1 on the charts in 2010. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. Dance music definitely dominated top 4 radio. Your Lady Gagas, your Rihannas, your Ushers, your one-hit wonder pop stars of the week, often with a hip-hop artist featured. Katy Perry and Snoop Dogg? How the hell did that happen? And yes, I did actually make a point of trying to listen to Top 40 radio at this time, though they really should have just called it Top 8 radio. I remember I was sitting at work and the radio station they had playing just kept recycling the same songs over and over again, and man did it get old really fast. And needless to say, this pop formula was pretty far removed from the edginess of rock and roll.
Well, Pink had a pop rock hit with Raise Your Glass.
So raise your glass if you are wrong.
I mean, okay, it's still obviously a pop song produced by Max Martin.
Does he have to write every single song that's out on the radio?
Yes. Yes, he does.
Okay, continue.
But I do like that it's tongue-in-cheek, has an edge to it, and definitely appreciate the nod to gay marriage in the video. And speaking of hip-hop, Hayley Williams from Paramore collaborated with B.O.B.
I like these songs okay, but they all just sort of feel like they're relying on modern production techniques and especially auto-tune. Although one top 40 artist that sometimes seemed to capture a retro rock vibe was Bruno Mars. Although Bruno dabbled with a lot of genres, he's still known to this day as the throwback guy. While sitting at work listening to this vapid parade of electronic pop music, suddenly what sounded like a Police song came on the radio. I knew it wasn't the Police, it turned out to be Bruno Mars, but boy did this track with real guitars, bass, and drums stand out in a collection of synths and drum machines. I also remember getting into a 2013 album by Daft Punk of all acts. Yeah, the same band that helped kick off the auto-tune craze. But for this album, they collaborated with Nile Rodgers, who played some really funky guitar parts. But what was going on with rock radio? Well, it does need to be noted that a lot of rock radio stations had been taken down by this point. If you look at the top songs from this time, a lot of them come from long-established bands or artists like Ozzy Osbourne. One album I remember really getting into came from the Foo Fighters called Wasted Light, a CD that, while I couldn't find it and getting ready for this video, I did play a lot. And what drew me to this album was the more vintage recording techniques employed for it. I remember reading that the entire album was recorded in Dave Grohl's garage. He reunited with Butch Vig, not to mention Nirvana member Pat Smear, now a full member of the band.
And then he said, "What do you think about making the record on tape?"
And just as a reminder, tape had really not been used to record for well over a decade. And because they couldn't fix anything digitally, the performance had to be really tight, which resulted in another memorable release from them. And I'd say they set out what they planned to do. Without the gimmicks of digital production, the album really shows how exciting the sound of a real band cut to tape can be. Walk remains one of their most loved songs, a very optimistic, resilient song, but no less rockin'. But if you want something much darker, well, one of the most loved releases from the decade came from another veteran band of the grunge era, Alice in Chains.
Some of you might have heard of them.
I thought you were being eaten by wolves.
Yeah. And thanks for your help, you miserable dingus. It had been over 20 years since the release of Alice in Chains' iconic Dirt album, and over a decade since the death of Lane Staley, who we mentioned in the last episode, was replaced by William Duvall. But in 2013, Alice in Chains released Devil Put Dinosaurs Here. And with all due respect to the late Lane Staley, listening to this album, it's like he never died. Even the very first song, Hollow, just throws you back to that iconic early 90s rock sound. It's so heavy. A lot of other people thought so too, as it debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. By the way, I printed another list out. Do you want to know what's considered the best rock of the 2010s?
Is it some random anime song?
Oh, how little you think of me. No, it's like Clockwork from Queens of the Stone Age.
Oh, that's a good album. I'm really glad I was reminded of this album in researching the 2010s, because not only is it musically diverse, I really love the George Harrison-style slide on I Sat by the Ocean, but it's kind of a miracle it got made at all, especially with frontman Josh Homme hospitalized for some time, and he almost died.
Every time something went wrong, it was just like clockwork, and then when it would go right, finally, it was like clockwork too.
That's probably why there's such dark imagery all over this album, but in a sublime way.
It's all downhill from here.
Dave Grohl once again guest strummed on the record, along with Elton John on piano and Trent Reznor singing, a true standout from this decade.
I'm not really feeling it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, figures we don't agree on something again.
Yeah. But we're not gonna fight in Central Park this time.
Well, we'll see how this goes.
One album that did stand out to me was Danish band Volbeat's Beyond Hell, Above Heaven.
Well, I heard that the devil's walking around.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the part where you play a music video clip, isn't it?
Given YouTube's strict copyright system, you go ahead.
Okay. Actually, I don't have the lyrics on me at this moment.
I'm very disappointed.
So am I. But most of the stuff from this decade really does sound like a throwback, and the general public at large seem to either forget what rock and roll was all about, or, in the younger generation's case, just had no frame of reference for it. By the way, do you remember when Billy Joe Armstrong of Green Day had that meltdown at the iHeartRadio festival?
I do.
Well, the media reported it as Billy having a breakdown on stage and having to check into rehab afterwards. He was swearing at the audience, and then he smashed his guitar. Yeah, I know, pretty shocking, right? Never mind the fact that we talked about The Who blowing up the stage 5 episodes ago, and all Pete Townsend ever did was swear at the audience.
This is a f***ing rock and roll concert, not a f***ing tea party.
Seriously, what the hell happened to the audience for rock music?
And in actuality, the real story is much more telling of the failing music industry. The concert cut Green Day's set short by 15 minutes so that Usher could play longer. I've got nothing against Usher expanding his set, but at the expense of cutting Green Day's?
Look at that f***ing sign right there. 1 minute. I'm not f***ing Justin Bieber, you motherfuckers.
And look, I can attest to how frustrating it is to travel to the gig, sound check, plan your set, only to have a promoter cut you off. Believe me, this happens a lot more than you think. And drunk or not, I don't blame Billy one bit for calling out this corporate sham of a show.
It's honestly one of the most real rock and roll things that happened in this decade, and for the general public to brand it as some kind of drunken tirade without holding the industry liable just shows you where the landscape was in the 2010s.
Excuse me, what are you doing coming into this house with your shoes still on?
What?
I would think that someone who's into Japanese animation like you are would appreciate the cultural customs of taking your shoes off at the door.
Yeah, you know what? That's really inconsiderate of you.
Oh, shut up, JT. You're just as bad as he is. Now take your damn shoes off if you're gonna feel the wrath of this vacuum.
Well, speaking of 90s bands coming back with memorable albums, in 2012, Soundgarden reunited with King Animal.
Did you say Soundgarden?
Nani?
I've been away for too long.
No shirtless Chris Cornell this time.
Yeah, to be honest, this album didn't grab me like their classic 90s works, or even the albums Alice in Chains or Queens of the Stone Age were putting out at this time.
What do you expect? Everyone was getting older. They can't keep it up forever.
I don't know. The Rolling Stones seem to keep doing it. Now in their... Wait, when was their first album again?
1964.
Jeez, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, sixth decade as a band. They released an album called Blue and Lonesome, returning to their roots with a collection of old blues covers. Talk about returning to the roots of rock and roll. The video for Ride 'Em On Down even featured Kristen Stewart driving a blue Mustang.
I make a Twilight joke, but I never saw any of those films.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Okay, so is this the part of the video where we talk about legacy acts that put out albums during this decade?
Have our videos become so formulaic?
Well, you might as well start talking about the Beatles since you can't go one damn video without talking about them.
Well, actually, Paul McCartney fronted the surviving members of Nirvana for a track called Cut Me Some Slack.
I finally understood that I was in the middle of a Nirvana reunion.
I actually really like that Nirvana invited some female rockers to front the band for their Hall of Fame induction. Joan Jett, Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth, St. Vincent, even Lorde performed All Apologies.
She's good. But did you know she's actually Randy Marsh from South Park?
Yeah, I am Lord,
Yeah, I'm Lorde, yeah. So you two have moved on from pop cultural references in The Simpsons to pop cultural references in South Park?
We stopped watching The Simpsons in the 2010s.
Yeah, especially that one episode which was just one long commercial for Lady Gaga. Seriously, can't the show just end already? You know, since you mentioned Ozzy earlier, he actually reunited with Black Sabbath to release the album 13. In 2012, Rush would release Clockwork Angels, their final album before the passing of Neil Peart in 2020. Also, Guns N' Roses reunited with Axl, Izzy, and Slash for the Not in This Lifetime tour. So did Motley Crue, though they were really showing their age.
If you want to hear a rock band that's still in their prime, let's check in with Paramore.
Ooh.
Having gone through some lineup changes, Hayley Williams spoke of their 2013 self-titled album as something of a reintroduction of the band to the public, opting for a poppier sound.
I feel like listening to our catalog, this is the biggest jump. So I just want our fans to go into it with an open mind.
And you can really hear that on their song Ain't It Fun.
Ain't it fun? Ain't it good being all alone?
And the moat, and the moat, and the moat.
The album has some good tracks, but it's definitely poppier compared to the emo rock vibe of Riot.
Did we ever really get a consensus on what exactly emo was?
It's the 2010s. Who cares anymore?
Yeah, actually, I think we should change into more 2010s fashion, don't you think?
Sure.
This is the fashion of the 2010s.
This is what I was wearing.
Well, it doesn't really seem like anything special.
Wasn't that the 2010s in general?
On the more Baroque pop side of things...
Interesting genre to transition to.
Hey, work for Brian Wilson.
You are right.
Florence and the Machine's organ-driven anthem, Shake It Out, is a very uplifting number which Florence Welch was inspired to write because of a hangover.
I can definitely relate to that. What? I have a drinking problem.
Oh, yeah.
Makes sense.
But it's always darkest before the dawn.
I think there was another song that came out with a similar name to this, wasn't there?
Yeah, my own. I uploaded a live video on this channel in early 2011 for an original song called Shake It Off. It's still up if anyone wants to check it out.
No. There's another song with that title.
Oh, yeah, the artist slips my mind at the moment. I know what you're talking about, though. She's very popular.
Oh, I know who you mean. It's Shake It Off by Taylor Swift.
So in 2012, English band Mumford & Sons released Babel. Even though they were basically an Americana band, they were also marketed as rock.
Wait, weren't we just talking about Taylor Swift?
I have the power of video editing.
Video editing, it's so lame.
Would you like me to edit in the wolves?
Mumford & Sons. I would honestly put Mumford & Sons more as folksy than rock, but that doesn't mean I didn't like their songs, especially the track I Will Wait.
And Mumford & Sons weren't the only band. Americana was huge in the 2010s. However, there was definitely a backlash to putting these bands in the rock genre. Alice Cooper actually came out and said,
"Don't call it rock and roll. That's an offense to rock and roll."
Though I do like Mumford & Sons' response.
And also, I didn't know that rock and roll had rules.
Well, isn't the first rule of rock and roll is that there are no rules?
And they have a good point there. Neil Young made Americana music, so did the Eagles. Hell, Bob Dylan gave rock and roll its voice. So in more modern times, something like Renegades by Ex-Ambassadors isn't too far off from that classic Americana vibe. But like I said, whereas Neil or Bob would sing about social injustices or more introspective subjects, I think the biggest difference is that a lot of these bands in the 2010s had more of a pop leaning.
Yeah, but everyone had a pop leaning in the 2010s. Miley Cyrus was obviously accepted as pop music, but she could still rock out when she wanted to. Ever seen her cover Led Zeppelin?
I'll love you when the summer comes.
You know, I gotta agree with you, Unamused Neighbor. It's a pretty good performance. I like it.
Okay, I have a name, you know.
Oh, it's not Unamused Neighbor.
No, it's Ashley. You even said it in our Fleetwood Mac video.
Speaking of which, where's Ashley? She was supposed to be here with the goldfish. Yeah, I don't follow continuity in any of these videos, but since we're revealing names, I have one too. It's Nick.
What are you talking about? Your name is the other guy. Your first name is the, your middle name is other, and your last name is Guy.
No. It's actually Nick.
Even hip-hop was stepping away from its R&B roots and putting a much heavier emphasis on pop music.
Well, not so much Kendrick Lamar.
I love my hoe, when you're looking at me.
Not only did his production on albums like Pimp a Butterfly have a stronger emphasis on R&B and funk rock, but Kendrick wrote more socially conscious lyrics, many in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, which was a refreshing change of pace from the escapism that dominated the charts. That being said, if you're looking for rock songs in the purest sense, there's not as many of them to be found in the middle of the decade.
Well, if you're looking for heavy guitar jams and raucous vocals, we should listen to Avenged Sevenfold's Hail to the King. I really dug this album. Definitely can hear a Metallica influence. The first track, Shepherd of Fire, especially has those Enter Sandman vibes. And Sinister Gates' guitar solos? Haha, they're face-melting. Avenged Sevenfold really sounds like one of the few bands from this era fighting to keep rock and roll alive. And hey, it worked! This wasn't just for some niche rock market, it hit #1 on the Billboard charts. In between Robin Thicke and Ariana Grande. To quote Huey Lewis in the News, the heart of rock and roll is still beating.
I think the scaled-back production is part of this album's charm. It just stands out more when the radio is so packed with computerized production. I know I keep downplaying rock's popularity at this time, but to be fair, a lot of these albums did have a noticeable presence on the album charts. Hail to the King, Paramore, Mumford & Sons, Black Sabbath's 13, Vampire Weekend's Modern Vampires of the City. Pearl Jam's Lightning Bolt was very popular. The track Sirens was apparently inspired by Roger Waters' tour of The Wall and a commentary from Eddie Vedder on facing his own mortality. Which I gotta say, considering I hadn't heard the song in years, hits me a lot harder as an older man. But carrying on with the metal subgenre, Swedish band Ghost started to gain some attention in America.
It's amazing how many Swedish bands break through in America.
Oh, sweet little Ashley. Breaking in America is what Swedish bands do.
It still gave us ABBA, though.
Hey, I like ABBA.
You would.
You would not.
Mamma mia! Here I go again! Ah!
Their 2015 album, Meliora, definitely leaned into the doom metal vibe, and they certainly dressed the part when they performed live. And while there are some instrumental breaks on this album that are just fantastic, and I certainly enjoy Ghost theatrics, I didn't quite feel the same rawness in the vocals as I did with Avenged Sevenfold.
I kinda liked them. I'd rather listen to Ghost than, say, the Imagine Dragons. Thunder, feel the thunder. You know when I was high and I imagined dragons in the 60s episode? But have you seen these gigantic dragons? They're breathing fire in your kitchen? This is not what I had in mind.
I didn't mind them early on. I still think Radioactive is a pretty good electronic rock song. That line, Welcome to the New Age, definitely has apocalyptic undertones that I really dig.
Yeah, but the more music they put out, which always seemed to be for either movie trailers or video game commercials, the more I just grew to hate them. Imagine Dragons' arrangements and productions were just so, well, sterile.
You know, actually, now that you mention it, this is kind of a good example of that overproduced We Are Young sound I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, it sounds nothing like rock and roll.
You know, it could even be like a later Katy Perry song.
In fact, independent Irish artist Hozier adopted the same sound for his breakthrough hit Take Me to Church. Though, to its credit, the lyrical content does go deeper with the paradox between religion and love. But man, I'm really missing that rock and roll vibe right now.
You know what? If we want to rock and roll, we gotta listen to Halestorm.
Ooh! That bitch can be her heart out. The
So do I! So do I!
Yeah! Woo!
Halestorm features the pure awesomeness that is singer-guitarist Lizzie Hale, along with her brother RJ on drums. We briefly highlighted their debut album in the last episode, but in 2012, they released the album Strange Case of, and yeah, this album is awesome.
Ah, I love this! This definitely sounds like something that could have come out in the last 2 decades of rock. Love it!
She's a f***ing badass.
Yeah!
What, I can't say f***?
YouTube guidelines, they suck.
Ah, sucking motherfucking piece of dog turd.
Another band I really dug that's still putting out good rock albums is The Pretty Reckless.
Isn't this with Taylor Momsen from Gossip Girl?
Yep, she's the lead singer.
This is one of those rare times when an actor transitions into a rock star and it actually works.
Have you ever thought about maybe taking a break from music and going back to acting?
Going to Hell is a cool album. I especially like the Chain Gang vocal on Heaven Knows. It kind of reminds me of Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll.
Also, Royal Blood's got a blues rock sound to them.
But of course, none of these bands could compete with the greatest act in all of the 2010s. Yeah, to be honest, when I included this in the first episode of History of Rock, I was really looking for the most annoying song I could possibly add. We've now come to the time where we started the show, late 2014 going into 2015. Man, did you think 10 years ago music would be what it is today?
I thought the Macross would be real by now.
Yeah, I didn't even know about you guys until the 90s episode.
You know, it's funny, I was trying to remember the whole backstory as to why I wanted to do this History of Rock series to begin with. Personally, I feel like rock and roll is in my blood. I get a rush playing or even just listening to this music that I don't get from anything else. I think with the amount of nostalgic web series that were already out there, your angry video game nerds, your nostalgia critics, your red letter medias, and the fact that, well, at the time there weren't as many mainstream YouTube channels dedicated to rock and roll history, I just decided to start the series. Despite constant interruptions.
Woo! Riot! Woo!
Right now, it's time to talk about
the British invasion.
Your show would be nothing without me, and you know it!
I remember getting hit by that annoying hippie bum a lot.
Hey, give me that phone. I gotta call my accountant.
You don't have an accountant!
Hey, get out!
Kill two birds with one stone. Doesn't that go against the whole love and peace movement? Oh, I like the Grateful Dead.
Well, you're gonna be very grateful when I kill you!
I remember meeting you in the hallway. Are you here to talk to me about the Church of Scientology or how I can lower my ComEd bill?
Do you know anything about Nirvana?
Yeah, sure.
Works for me. Come on, let's go.
Whoa! My shoulder still hurts, by the way.
You think that's bad? Remember the three-headed Jennifer Beals monster?
Yeah. Why haven't you mentioned Heart yet?
Okay, how did you get past security? Excuse me?
Don't stop me now. I'm having such a good time. I'm having a ball.
Yeah, what the hell happened to her?
She's still on the run from the law.
She kind of freaked us all out in the last episode. I found about 50 kilos of blue crystal meth in the closet. Do you know anything about that?
I am the one who knocks.
That explains a lot. But of course, the main highlight has been showcasing all of this incredible music. But we've also had to discuss the darker aspects of rock and roll history. Segregation in the 1950s, sexism against female rockers, rock and roll's reaction to the Vietnam War or the Kent State Massacre, the commercialization of the genre, so much censorship and industry meddling, and the many, many rock icons we've lost over the years too soon. And well, that brings me to the darkest chapter of this episode, the rock stars we lost in the 2010s. Which admittedly isn't unexpected. These rock stars, some of whom have been here since the beginning, were getting older, and living the rock star life was catching up with them. As George Harrison once said, all things must pass. But that doesn't mean we didn't feel their losses, and some of them came as a real shock.
Yeah, brace yourselves, this is gonna take a while.
In the early years of the 2010s, some major contributors to rock and roll passed, such as Ronnie James Dio of later Black Sabbath, Gary Moore of Thin Lizzy, Clarence Clemens from Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, and notably Amy Winehouse, who became another casualty of the 27 Club.
She may not have been a rocker in the purest sense, but she certainly was a throwback to those 60s singers like Ronnie Spector, and her loss is still felt to this day.
In 2012, we lost rock pioneer Etta James, Levon Helm of the band. 2013 took Ray Manzarek of the Doors. 2014 was when Joe Cocker, sax player Bobby Keys, and Jack Bruce of Cream passed away. I actually made a whole Cream tribute video that year in honor of Jack, which isn't up anymore due to YouTube restrictions. It's actually what got me working on this series. 2015, we lost another OG, B.B. King, who was 89 years young, and another legend I paid tribute to on this channel.
Also Chris Squire of Yes, Scott Weiland of STP, and Lemmy of Motorhead.
2016, my God, was this a terrible year.
Yeah, January of that year, David Bowie died at the age of 65. Just 2 days before his passing, he dropped the album Black Star, which, listening to the lyrics, is all about his battle with liver cancer.
Ain't that just like me?
Truly an amazing swan song to go out on.
And a little over a week later, we lost Glenn Frey of the Eagles.
Then in February came the loss of Maurice White of Earth, Wind & Fire, who had long struggled with Parkinson's.
Also George Martin, producer for the Beatles, Keith Emerson of ELP, who committed suicide, and Greg Lake from pancreatic cancer.
Not to mention Elvis's guitarist Scotty Moore, Leon Russell, George Michael.
And in April of 2016, Prince. I was on tour when Prince died, and the day after, we ended up performing at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, where Prince had coincidentally played his final show. We couldn't help but play Little Red Corvette during soundcheck. 2017 wasn't much better, and Chuck Berry would pass on at the age of 90. The very man who started us on the journey back in 1955. I'm glad I got the chance to see him before we lost him. We would also lose Greg Allman, who would finally join his brother Dwayne in the afterlife, and Allman brother Butch Trucks, who would also commit suicide.
And another star who took his life in May 2017, Chris Cornell.
God, this one killed me, man. The day after he died, we happened to be playing a 90s show, and we dedicated Black Hole's Son in his honor. Chris really felt like he was part of our generation.
That also means that Eddie Vedder is the only surviving singer of the original grunge bands.
And as if things couldn't get even more tragic, Chester Bennington of Linkin Park also committed suicide.
Later that year, Tom Petty died. And then, in 2018, another shocking loss of someone we grew up with, we lost Dolores O'Riordan of the Cranberries.
And finally, in 2019, we lost two drumming titans, Ginger Baker of Cream and Hal Blaine of the Wrecking Crew. And before the decade could finish, Rick Ocasek of the Cars died at the age of 75, who I made a tribute video for shortly after.
Jesus, how are we possibly supposed to come back from all that tragedy?
Well, we usually play the Tiny Tim clip. I'm still depressed.
Well, there's always Magical Beat. Even I'm getting tired of it at this point.
Maybe Beavis and Butthead?
I can't do it anymore, guys. I'm sorry. I'm calling it. I'm JT Curtis. This is the history of rock and roll.
No, stop.
What?
Come on, you guys. We can't let it end like this. Rock and roll isn't about wallowing in grief. It's about guitars and drums and Axl Rose screaming, yeah! And Nikki Sixx drinking heroin out of a fire hose at MTV. And that time all three of us won Album of the Year and trashed the Plaza Hotel.
What the hell are you talking about?
Listen to me. We cannot let it end like this. Americana, heavy metal, folk music, it doesn't matter. We have a duty to keep rock and roll alive. What is the next band on that list, good sir?
Well, it's the album Blurry Face by 21 Pilots.
That's it, I'm out. F the 2010s.
Hey, come on! Don't get stressed out.
But now we're stressed out.
Blurry Face is another album that I would hesitate to call rock and roll, feeling like it has more of a pop and hip-hop leaning.
Yeah, but it was huge. As of this recording, the video for Stressed Out has almost 3 billion views. That's insane.
Well, yeah, and Blurry Face itself has been called a concept album. The Blurry Face, the idea of the concept, sort of representing mental anxiety, but it's really one of those albums that I appreciate after the fact rather than actually enjoy. Look, by 2015, I was pushing my first solo album, I was touring with Let It Be, and focusing on the series, so I missed out on this album's popularity. And I just sort of feel at this point, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm getting older, but I really am falling into that they sure don't make them like they used to trope.
Well, that's what I've been saying.
Look, I talked extensively about the changing music industry in the 2000s with digital downloads, and I'd still say that was the point of no return. But by the 2010s, you didn't even need to download music anymore. With the rise of streaming platforms like Spotify, you could pull up any song you wanted at any time, out of context, sometimes randomly played by the app's algorithm, and it's just completely changed the way people perceive music. I'm sure many of you know that artists make almost no money off of streaming. I can attest to that just by showing my residuals, which are fractions of pennies. But the record companies don't have a problem with it, and that's because they've signed multi-billion-dollar licensing deals to sell their artist's catalog to the streaming services. And I think the biggest problem is that the general public, especially younger millennials and Gen Zers who have now grown up with having music available with the click of a button, doesn't value it anymore. Especially with the way music is produced now. The fact that songs are so short because of TikTokers' shorter attention spans, everything needing to be more about image than performance, they just see music as background noise. Todd in the Shadows did a good video about this.
New bands have very limited options for promoting new material. That was my first association with Portugal the Man's new big hit single, Aaron Paul dancing on his treadmill because vitamin water tastes just so good. I cannot enjoy art when every interaction with it is so blatantly tied to commercialism.
And yeah, that's just kind of the thing. You're discovering this music through licensed ads because, well, that's the only way artists make money anymore. And because a lot of these advertisers want something more mechanical in order to catch younger viewers' attention, that's what record companies push these days. And sure, there is still a market for vinyl, but it's just not sustainable to keep a band together, record music live, even perform live or tour. And I think that's why rock acts just haven't gotten the same kind of attention as more electronic-based acts, especially ones centered more around image.
Well, what about Greta Van Fleet? They're very popular.
Wait. Before the song plays, I just want to ask you both. What does this band sound like?
Led Zeppelin.
Exactly. Now, don't get me wrong, Greta Van Fleet is still a rockin' band. You certainly gotta be to generate comparisons to Led Zeppelin. And in recent years, I think they have been working harder to evolve their sound.
Yeah, but for their 2010s material, it's just Led Zeppelin.
Well, it doesn't just sound like Led Zeppelin. It also kind of sounds like Adam Sandler?
Another band that tends to get lobbed in with Greta Van Fleet as a 70s rock throwback is Rival Sons, though not quite as derivative. I actually enjoyed going through their material and want to sit on it a bit more. Jay Buchanan, that guy can friggin' wail, man. It's a shame their material doesn't pull in the same numbers as Greta Van Fleet, but hopefully more people can discover them.
You know what? If you really want a throwback band that's really far out there, we gotta talk about King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard from Australia.
The King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard? What the heck? That's a real band?
Oh yeah, and our followers really want us to talk about them.
First off, it's a pure, honest-to-God psychedelic rock band, even if they don't really dress like one. In decades past, a psychedelic band like this would have never gotten radio play or be promoted by a major label, much less this decade.
I mean, there's Tame Impala. They have a bit of a psychedelic sound to them.
Yeah, but it's still pretty poppy.
Now, any other label would call King Gizzard too out there or not commercially viable, so it's nice to see something in this genre gaining popularity. Second, the band name makes people want to check them out. A lost art in and of itself.
I mean, it got my attention.
I really like their album, I'm in Your Mind Fuzz.
And lyrically, the theme seems to be around mind control, which really complements the frantic nature of the music. In contrast to their previous records, which had more of an indie charm to them sonically, this 2014 album was recorded in a traditional studio and the first to get a proper worldwide release. Good thing too, because this album is fantastic, my favorite track being Cellophane.
What made it difficult to go through this band's material is that they have so many albums. Like, their discography is even bigger than many bands that have been around since the 60s. In 2017 alone, they put out 5 albums. That's insane! And while I really appreciate how unique they are, and some of their albums like Nonagon Infinity really are concept albums with songs segueing into each other, it is kinda hard to really hone in on them. Though I do appreciate that they just kind of put their stuff out there and say do what you will. I mean, they know no one makes money off of streaming anymore, so why not just put their music out there and whoever listens to it, listens to it. And that's just kind of what all of us independent artists did. We put our music out there and hope for the best.
I can attest to that.
Yeah, up top. Ever heard of the Lemon Twigs? They're a newer band with a 60s, 70s sound that I was introduced to through a friend. Their 2018 release, Go to School, is a concept album about a monkey going to a human school. Or Bad Flower, the single Ghost, not to be confused with the band, is straight up about attempted suicide, which Josh Katz admitted came from personal experience having panic attacks after shows. You know, I have to say, this subject hits me pretty hard as well because, well, my own piece that I released at the end of 2019 came out of my own battle with depression and grief. To break the fourth wall for a second, my father, Jay Curtis, the man who was our original director and played the annoying hippie bum, died of ALS in 2018. Our 1970s video was dedicated to him. I went through the worst grief and PTSD I can possibly describe, and the only way I could really deal with it was channeling it into music, hence where my piece Elements came from. It was to be a 20-minute prog rock piece with a 1970s vibe, sampling some of Jay's poetry from his book that he released shortly before his passing. I had no expectations for this to hit or be picked up for a record contract or anything. I just spent a year recording, filming the video, and releasing it because, well, it was cheaper than therapy.
Father, all your steam will evaporate to the clear blue morning fog. Look to that sky and aspirate the cool air.
And to be honest, the video got a lot more attention than I expected it to. By no means a viral video or anything, I mean it's 22 minutes. But I'm honestly very happy that it's gotten the attention it has. I even released it on vinyl. Now you might be thinking, why am I spending so much time talking about my own album?
Shameless self-promotion?
That's partially true. But also to illustrate that this is how rock and roll has stayed alive. Not by the mainstream, but by local artists making music they're passionate about. There's even friends of mine right here in New York who released their own music in the 2010s.
This is the army of the underdog. Hey, hey, just be yourself if you wanna join. Hey, hey.
This music gave my life renewed purpose, as I'm sure it did for Josh and Bad Flower and, well, a lot of people. Rock and roll was always about emotion and rising above, even from the very beginning.
Well, speaking of social commentary, there's that song Gender Dysphoria Blues by Against Me! ! They were already a fairly established band, but when singer Laura Jane Grace came out as a trans woman in the 2010s, the band released Transgender Dysphoria Blues, and the band rocks really hard on this record.
And, you know, it's true. Rock was never about climbing the Billboard charts. Led Zeppelin never had a #1 hit, nor did Jimi Hendrix, but who cares?
Look at this band called Swans. They're an indie group that formed all the way back in the 80s who returned to great acclaim in the 2010s.
And if you want something out there, watch Black Midi, who make really weird music.
And to their credit, even these pop stars can surprise you. Since you mentioned Kesha plaguing the airwaves in the beginning, you might be surprised to learn that she collaborated with the Struts for the rocker Body Talks.
In late 2018, I went to see Eric Clapton play, and it was a good show, but his opener really blew me away. That was Gary Clark Jr., a name I'd heard over the years as a respected blues guitarist, but seeing him perform his own material, it sounded straight up like Prince. I loved his performance so much, I ended up buying his album on vinyl when it came out a year later, This Land. And the title track? Oh man, this song is as rock and roll as it gets.
Well, I'm America's son. This is where I come from. This land is mine.
It brings us back full circle. In the 50s episode, I talked about how racial tensions affected rock and roll's beginnings. And it's a shame that even 70 years later, racism is still a very real issue. But again, Gary is very at home with the old blues mantra, using the music to speak out and shake off the blues. That, my friends, is rock and roll. And well, I guess I might as well ask our final question.
Did the 2010s rock hard?
Well, what do you think?
In terms of the mainstream, it's still a no for me, dog. The main takeaway is that while every decade evolved the rock genre in some way, for better or for worse, mainstream rock in the 2010s just feels derivative of music from the past. Music media consumption has changed. Everyone's got phones with the internets on them, nobody's listening to the radio, and they sure as hell are not watching MTV. And while this still means that derivative, factory-produced music will still be the norm and will never really die, it also means that a lot more underground artists can get their voices heard through good online social media marketing. While it does still sound like stuff you'd hear in the past, I would also argue that it's also a bit more contemporary, and thus won't be pigeonholed into a certain decade.
Well, what about you?
I mean, you can copy and paste what I said last time. For the most part, it's more pop-oriented. Stuff like 21 Pilots is more of a mix of rock, hip-hop, and pop. But through researching this decade, I was glad to discover bands like Halestorm and The Pretty Reckless. This decade's got some female representation happening. But again, if you're gonna compare anything from the 2010s to Led Zeppelin or Aerosmith or Queen, it's probably gonna be a losing battle. So come on, almighty JT, do you think the 2010s rocked hard?
You know, it almost doesn't matter. In the 2010s, Gene Simmons said rock and roll is dead. And to that I say, fuck you, Gene Simmons. The fact that you are watching this video is proof rock isn't dead. It's not any more dead than jazz or classical music. Plenty of people still listen to these genres in packed concert halls. Same with rock and roll. It's why I made this series in the first place, to tell people about this music's history and keep it alive. I mean, let's review here. In the late 50s, they called Buddy Holly's death the day the music died and concluded rock and roll was just some fad come and gone. But in the 60s, the Beatles invaded, and what followed was this psychedelic renaissance for rock and roll. Then after the deaths of the 27 Club and the hippie movement in the early 70s, they kept saying rock is dying or already dead. But Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, David Bowie, and countless others put out some of the greatest albums in rock history. Disco came around to knock it off the airwaves, so punk and the new wave ushered in a new era. And when rock was getting too big for its own good in the 80s, they scaled back in the 90s and brought the genre back to its roots. Jay said it best in his last recorded video for this series.
Just when you think music is dead, the new wave comes out. And now we're in a part where we're in that low part, but we're going to bounce back up and the passion will come back and people will listen to rock and roll because rock and roll rules!
And as Nick said, the internet, for all its problems, did open so many doors for rock and roll. Did I make a lot of money or get on the charts with my own career? No, but I still made these songs, people have bought copies of my album, and the same goes for a lot of independent artists. And to my way of thinking, isn't that enough? Sure, it would be nice if it was popular again and the mainstream just gave a shit more, but so long as there's still one person on this planet still enjoying rock and roll, it will never die. And well, that brings us up to the present. Who knows, maybe 10 years from now we'll talk about the 2020s.
God, I hope not. No offense.
And that concludes the history of rock and roll, at least for now. And what I'm most looking forward to is never having to hang out with either one of you.
What are you talking about? We're roommates.
Yeah! And I'm not going back out there, especially since those wolves are still after me. God. Oh my God, they found me, they found me. You're never taking my VHS anime, you bastards! Mrs. Bowie!
Do you know how to dispose of a body? Thank you for watching this video and for supporting us for the past 10 years. Who's your favorite band or artist from the 2010s? Did we forget some? Who am I kidding? Of course you're going to tell me I forgot someone. Comment below and let us know. Keep listening to rock and roll by supporting local artists, and it will never die. Hey everyone, we just want to give a big shout out to everyone who donated to the fundraiser and all the patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much. We couldn't make this happen without you.
Yes, thank you so much.
These are always fun to do, and thank you guys for donating.